Hey, everyone. I'm Kara Sowles, so I run the community team at Puppet, and I've led our community work there for the past 5 years. You've heard a lot of great stuff today about open source communities, communities of all kinds. We're going to break it down here, and we're going to talk at the level of what you're doing within the community and how that affects you. So for those of you who aren't familiar with Puppet, Puppet automates the delivery and operation of software. As a major open source project, as well as a company that makes leading commercial software, we've learned a lot about community along the way. So that's what we're going to talk about here. The word community gets thrown around a lot, and it kind of starts to lose meaning after a while. So over the next 15 minutes, we're going to try to break it down in a more usable way. I'm going to start off by contrasting user bases and community. Not every user base is a community. For the purposes of this talk, we're going to try to pry apart the differences. To do this, and bear with me here, please, I want to talk about energy. I'm going to go over a brief refresher for those of us that didn't take chemistry or who it's like a really long time ago and we do not remember. I know I don't remember it that well, so feel free to come, well, actually, afterwards. Endothermic describes a process or reaction in which the system absorbs energy from its surroundings. So, for example, mammals like us are endothermic. A classic Chemistry 101 example would be the endothermic reaction happening here in this container, where it's become cooler than its surroundings, and it's absorbing nearby heat. So, refresher, this is endothermic. And exothermic describes a process or reaction that releases energy from the system to its surroundings. So in this example, the reaction has become hotter than its surroundings, and it is radiating out heat. This is exothermic. I would say a user base exists when a company creates things and users consume them, right? User bases are endothermic. They're taking in information, support, resources from a single company or entity, which isn't really a bad thing, right? I mean, this is good. But I would say a true community is exothermic. A community collectively generates the things that it collectively consumes. A community is radiating out resources that others in the community can rely on. Gene Kim, who many of you I'm sure are familiar with, has been referring to this for years as mutually exothermic interactions. If you ever speak at one of his conferences, he asks that at the end of your talk, you actually ask for help from the audience, that you encourage other people to put out energy the same way that you've just done, which I think is very cool. A user base can turn into a community by starting to generate energy, and vice versa. It's not a static thing. So let's talk a little bit more about the energy that's coming out of these interactions. In an exothermic reaction that we might think of, say, in chemistry, heat is an example that we've already talked about. But energy can also be released in the form of light, of electricity, of sound, of all of it. I mean, lightning is a classic exothermic reaction, right? This stuff is intense. In a community, we think about people giving out energy in the form of code, especially in the context of open source. This is what we tend to think of, which is very important and it's very valuable. But I think it's important not to get tunnel vision on this. There's a lot of other ways that you can sort of push what you're doing out into that space. It could be exothermic through conversations online. This is what we see a lot, folks on Slack, folks on IRC, helping each other out. It could be through talks that people are giving, talks like this one. And it could be through the cultural norms that the community encourages and expresses. It's radiating energy outwards in all of these different ways. And the success of a community, I think, relies on valuing more than just code in this context. I would say diversity and innovation rely on that as well. We heard a lot about disruption on day one. It takes a lot more ideas. When I was growing up, I grew up on a lake, and I would look out across the lake and see these bright flashes of light on the clouds. And I was always told that those are heat lightning, that heat lightning happens when it's not real lightning, there's no actual lightning, there's no sound, there's no thunder. It's just some energy, a little bit cloud to cloud, because it's a hot day. This is not true. Healing is not real. It's just regular cloud-to-ground lightning. It's just that you see it from far away. So you don't see the lightning. You don't hear the thunder, but it's still there. Just because you don't see it, just because you only see the bright flashes above it, doesn't mean it doesn't exist. I think it's similar for communities. Actually, let's get rid of that storm cloud, because this metaphor has some downsides. Poof. A community is also like this. A successful community has a lot going on within it that makes it that way, whether or not you can see it. Your success can't be separated from your environment. The success with a tool like NGINX can't be separated from your colleagues, from community members here, from NGINX itself, the people who help build that support for you. So I like to think of this as the positive side of where there's smoke, there's fire, which is a little sensitive for us right now in Oregon. Where there's lightning, there is definitely thunder. This could be bug reporters. There's a lot that goes into a community that makes it healthy. Someone has to file those bugs, right? Are they clearly filed? It could be leaders who show the community how to act and where to head. Teachers, people who are supporting others and helping them understand. Documentation writers who make our tools usable. Thank you so much. And contributors of all types. And when there's lightning, there is definitely thunder. And a quality community is behind successful users, which I'm sure you've found. What we've learned at Puppet through this is that your actions within a space like this really matter, and they matter in multiple ways. We've covered how it's code that you contribute, but we're also going to talk some about how it's the norms that you all contribute to that build what an exothermic community looks like, how it feels, how it functions. In many cases, norms are what separate exothermic and endothermic communities. Like, you already have people out doing stuff, but a healthy, authentic community is one that generates energy and in which members are nurturing each other's contributions, right? So I'm sure you've all seen groups that have had toxic norms. And there are some very prominent, even open source communities that have toxic norms, which cause people to stop participating, to stop contributing. If you go to get help on something and you get insulted in return, you're not going to come back next time you have a question. At least I'm not going to. And you're not going to come back when you have a suggestion or a new idea. So these communities have now become endothermic. They've switched. They're suppressing the energy that people would otherwise invest. And this is why codes of conduct, things like that, are really valuable, because they make it clear which norms are acceptable and are going to create that exothermic community. So let's talk through different kinds of norms. There are so many ways that we interact with norms in a community, but we'll go through a few examples. One might be method. What tools and practices are used? Where are the bug reports filed? Where are the important discussions held? Right? This differs a lot from space to space. Tone. How do people offer advice or help? Is it sarcastic critique? Or is it patient and understanding? I mean, this defines a space, and this defines how we experience a space. Problem solving. How are issues resolved? How are disagreements worked out? If different people think a product should go in different directions, how do people collaborate on that answer? That has huge effects on the success and the direction of any project. And inclusivity. How welcoming is the community? How are people greeted? How are they treated? Does it welcome diversity? Does it welcome new ideas and perspectives? These are just a few examples and a few ways to think about these norms, but I think it's really important to reflect on the huge impact that they have. So think about what norms you want to encourage. Let's be intentional in what we're creating together, right? Let's be intentional in the spaces that we want to build. And think about this actively. This is like a daily activity. This isn't just people who are setting the bylaws, right? So why is it worth your energy, though? Is it? I don't know. Is it worth your energy? In the first place, many reactions require activation energy, the minimum energy required to start a reaction. You have to put a certain amount of energy in to get it going before it's going to continue. So, for example, if you're out in the woods and you have no lighter with you, you're going to use a bow drill to rub two sticks together to start a fire, and it's going to be a lot of work. But once you get that fire going, right, all you have to do is feed it. It's happening. That was your activation energy. Although don't actually do this right now, again, because our whole state is on fire very sensitive topic. But is it worth that investment? Assuming like 8 hours of rest, if you're working 40 hours a week, you're probably spending around 35% of your waking time at work. 50 hours, it's like 45%. 60 hours, you're like 53%. I don't want to know if you're working more than 60 hours because you're just wasting time at that point. You can't physically get more done. But we spend a fair amount of our time at work. And it's important that work gives us some satisfaction, right? I mean, that's a privilege. We're in an industry that allows us more access to jobs and incomes than most. But given where we're at, we want to get that. There's a lot of different ways to think about and look at how and if we're satisfied in the work that we're doing. There's so many, so we'll just take a simple one today. Annie Key wrote a piece based on her work with many companies in the Harvard Business Review that covers the top things that she was hearing people were looking for in a workplace. The first one is a meaningful vision of the future. The second is a sense of purpose. And the third is great relationships. Does this kind of resonate some? There's a lot of different ways to slice this up. These things that are touched on here, I think, have really been touched on already at NGINX.conf, right? We heard a lot in day one keynotes about a meaningful vision of the future. Where are we headed? What's the purpose? Like, why are we going there? How are we going there? How are we building relationships here with other people who are using the same software, who are headed in the same direction, who have other interesting ideas? Communities are amazing because they have the opportunity to build these things both alongside and supplementing the work you do at your job. I mean, you're here to build these things, but also you can get some of this interest and this purpose and this satisfaction supplementing the work that you may do day to day. You're getting support and energy from folks who do similar work to you, but don't work with you at your company. I don't know how many of you this applies to, but I know a lot of people who they are one of the few people who does their job at their company. It gets isolating, right? Who's going to tell you what your mistakes are or where to head? So I think the investment, the activation energy, is worth that alone. It's worth being exothermic, reacting with your surroundings and giving off energy because you're building things together. You're not just lending a hand to a newbie, you're supplementing your own skills with help from others. You should be getting equal energy back in this kind of a space. This is not a philanthropic initiative, right? This is a sharing one. So given all of this, I would say ask yourself, how can I contribute to this community? What does that mean to me? How do you provide activation energy? How do you encourage an exothermic environment like this? As we've talked about, this is code, but this is not just code. This is not just open source. Right? You can have very healthy, very interested communities as well around commercial products. What is your place in this? What's your piece to give? And then what can you gain from this community? Right? You're here for a reason. Think about why you're at NGINX.conf, what you want to get out of today, and what you want to get out of the next year in this space, in this community. What's a skill you're missing that you could turn to someone else for? How do you take advantage of an exothermic community and take your own work or your own career to the next level? I think these are really important things to expressly think on as you participate in a space like this and reflect on. Thank you. If you want to know more about Puppet and NGINX together, I'm not covering it right now, but we have a partner relationship we're really excited about. So go say hi to Matt at the Puppet booth. He's really nice. Go say hi to him there, and he'll talk to you more. Thank you so much, everyone.